You think your life is hard. Imagine being born in an era where reaching 30 years old was considered a remarkable achievement, and half of all children died before properly learning how to run. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where your mere existence is an unlikely statistical accident that defies the medical probabilities of the time. You wake up. Not to the gentle sound of a digital alarm clock, nor with the gradual light of your smartphone. Your alarm is the strident cry of a rooster that seems to have made a personal pact to torture your eardrums from the first ray of sunlight. The weak light of dawn infiltrates lazily through the countless cracks in your hut, illuminating dust particles that dance in the stagnant air, like tiny emissaries of lung diseases not yet catalogued by medieval science. Your body immediately registers discomfort. Every joint protests against movement with a dull pain that you've learned to accept as normal since you were 15 years old. Your mattress. This generous description for a sack full of straw that hasn't been changed for 3 seasons itches unbearably against your skin. It's not paranoia, there really are hundreds of tiny creatures living there. Fleas and lice have considered your body private property for so long that they've probably established their own feudal system among your hair strands. The little noble lice certainly already charge taxes from the flea serfs that inhabit the less privileged regions of your body. You stretch carefully, trying not to disturb the other occupants of the bed. Spoiler: it won't work. The straw mattress responds with a concert of dry noises, announcing each of your movements as if it were a royal proclamation. The broken straw pokes your skin through the thin tunic you wear to sleep, the same one you'll wear during the day, as the concept of sleepwear is a luxury reserved for people not yet born. A good 4 or 5 centuries in the future. The smell. The smell. Close your eyes and imagine an olfactory symphony composed of smoke permanently impregnated in the walls, urine fermenting in the night bucket in the corner of the room, which someone will eventually empty into the street, and the concentrated body odor of your entire family who haven't taken a complete bath since the last king visited the region about 3 years ago. Your medieval brain is so accustomed to this mixture that it barely registers it, just as you no longer notice the smell of your own home in the 21st century after a few minutes. Except that this smell would make your modern self instantly faint. Speaking of family, you're not alone. In the same improvised straw bed sleep your parents, 3 surviving siblings of the 10 who were born, and occasionally a lost chicken that prefers human warmth to the roost. Privacy? You're not prepared for this revolutionary concept that will only arrive a few centuries from now. Sex, birth, death, everything happens in this same space, often with everyone watching. The idea of an individual bedroom would be as absurd as suggesting that the Earth revolves around the sun. Spoiler: Galileo is still a good few centuries away. The hut is essentially a single dark and stuffy room. In summer, it's a torture chamber that concentrates heat and potentiates odors to almost hallucinogenic levels. In winter, it transforms into a completely different experience of suffering, a refrigeration chamber where the wind whistles through the poorly sealed wattle and daub walls with a mixture of mud, straw, and manure. The windows, if we can call them that, are just rudimentary holes covered with waxed cloth or pieces of wood. Glass is for cathedrals and castles, not for people like you. The floor beneath your bare feet is simply packed earth, often damp and always cold. On rainy days, it transforms into a sticky paste that adheres to your cracked heels. During winter, it can get as hard as stone and equally frozen. In summer, it raises dust with each step. There is no comfortable middle ground in your relationship with this floor, just different variations of displeasure. The church bell rings in the distance, marking the first canonical hour of the day. Prime, as it's called, signals the official beginning of activities. Did you count the rings? Don't worry, you don't have a clock anyway. Time is vaguely measured by the position of the sun, by the canonical hours of the church, and by your constantly empty stomach. The village animals begin their own morning symphony. Moose, clucks and grunts mix with the distant voices of the first workers. You hear someone coughing violently in the neighboring hut. It's that cough again, the one that took your sister 2 winters ago. Everyone pretends not to notice, because naming the problem is to attract death's attention. The other occupants of the bed begin to wake up. Your father is already sitting, rubbing his swollen joints. Rheumatism aggravated by decades working in damp fields. Your mother, although 10 years younger than him, seems to be twice his age, her body destroyed by 8 childbirths and uninterrupted work. Your siblings stretch and push each other, fighting for the best spot on the communal mattress, although best is a purely theoretical distinction. Your first thoughts, still foggy from sleep, already instinctively calculate the day's variables. Does the sky you glimpse through the cracks look promising for field work? Will there be enough food until the next harvest? Will the Baron send his men to collect more taxes? Your stomach growls, reminding you that hunger is your natural state. The pains in your back and joints are already present, faithful companions that never abandon you, only varying in intensity from bearable to agonizing. Your father mentions that today you'll work in the fields of the feudal lord, the mandatory weekly corvée. This means a particularly brutal day of work under the supervision of an impatient overseer with no compensation beyond the privilege of continuing to occupy this miserable hut on lands that will never be yours. You already know you'll return home with bleeding hands and burning back, only to eat an insufficient meal before collapsing again onto this infested mattress. The light gradually increases, infiltrating through the cracks and marking irregular patterns on the dirt floor. It's time to start the morning preparations. Your stomach growls in anticipation of breakfast, although you know from experience that this persistent feeling of hunger will never be completely satisfied. Congratulations, you've survived the night. Good luck with the rest of the day. The statistics aren't exactly in your favor, but who cares about statistics in the Middle Ages? Certainly not the innumerable parasites that consider your body a cozy home. And this is just the awakening. The day has barely begun, and the coming hours will bring challenges that would make a modern man beg for the comfort of a boring air-conditioned office with ergonomic chairs. You aren't prepared for what comes next, but you also have no choice. Still drowsy, you realize that you need to prepare for the day. In the 21st century, this would mean a relaxing hot bath, fluoride toothpaste, and perhaps a refreshing deodorant. Lower your expectations drastically, time traveler. We're in the Middle Ages, where personal hygiene is a concept as foreign as smartphones or functional democracy. First, let's clarify a popular myth. Medievals weren't completely oblivious to cleanliness. They just had a radically different definition of what constitutes being clean. The Church, in its infinite wisdom, promotes the idea that frequent baths are morally suspicious. Excessive exposure of nudity leads to lust, and water opens the pores to dangerous miasmas. This isn't just religious superstition. In the medieval mind, it's advanced science. You get up and head to the water bucket, if there's any available. On the best mornings, someone in the family has already fetched fresh water from the communal well. On the worst, you use what's left from yesterday, indeterminate particles floating lazily on the murky surface. The water coming from the same well where animals occasionally fall in and decompose, or from the stream where the entire village washes clothes and dumps debris. would be classified by modern standards as extremely dangerous for human contact. For you, it's simply water. With cupped hands, you take some of this dubious, precious liquid and throw it on your face. The sensation is refreshing, despite everything. You rub your eyes, removing the crust of sleep. There's no soap, at least not as you know it. In wealthier homes, there might be ashes mixed with animal fat, something remotely similar to soap. In your house, however, water is the limit of morning luxury. What do you do when the water runs out or is too precious to waste on cleaning? Here's a medieval trick that would surprise many people. Urine. That's right. Your own matured urine has cleaning properties thanks to the natural ammonia it contains. The bucket in the corner, the one that received the family's night visits, isn't just for disposal, it's a precious resource. Aged urine is particularly valuable, used to clean wounds, surprisingly effective, brighten clothes, and yes, as a substitute for cleaning water when necessary. This was considered normal. Believe it or not, your mouth has a terrible taste when you wake up, a mixture of fermented food and bacteria thriving happily between your irregular teeth. Toothbrush? Please, contain your hysterical laughter. At best, you have a rough cloth and perhaps a chewed stick to form a kind of rudimentary brush. Some people use a mixture of ashes, salt, or crushed herbs to rub their teeth. The sensation is like rubbing sand against the already compromised enamel, but paradoxically, the abrasive properties actually help remove food residue. Your morning breath is an undeclared chemical weapon. Fortunately, everyone around you exhales the same putrid bouquet, so no one particularly notices. The concept of bad breath as a social problem is still centuries away. When everyone smells equally bad, no one really smells bad. Some people chew aromatic herbs like mint or sage to temporarily improve the situation, but it's like putting a drop of perfume in a swamp, an admirable effort, but useless. Now it's time to deal with your hair, that glorious nest of tangles, oiliness, and little tenants. Lice and fleas aren't occasional unwanted visits. They're permanent residents with acquired rights. Everyone has them, from the humblest peasant to the queen, although the royal variety of lice probably considers itself of superior lineage. You take your wooden or bone comb, a family heirloom passed down through generations, and begin the daily battle. The combing process is painful and methodical. Knots have formed during the night, and each pull of the comb tears out some strands along with them. Occasionally, you stop to crush between your fingernails the small parasites you find, a form of morning entertainment and rudimentary population control. In closer-knit families, this is a social ritual, sitting and removing lice from each other's hair, just as our primate cousins do. Is it repulsive? To modern sensibilities, certainly. For you, it's just Tuesday. Women generally keep long hair braided or covered for practicality, and, in married women, for religious modesty. Men vary between short and medium hair, depending on local fashion and occupation. Beards are common, not by aesthetic choice, but due to the inconvenience of shaving with a poorly sharpened knife without a mirror or hot water. Imagine shaving your face with something that resembles a rusty saw more than a blade. You have no notion of your own body odor. Literally, the phenomenon called olfactory fatigue ensures that you've become immune to your own aroma after minutes of exposure. It's a mercy of evolution. To a visitor from the future, you would emanate a combination of unwashed sweat, fermented clothes, smoke, earth, and other indescribable odors. To your contemporaries, you smell completely normal. For special occasions, such as important masses or festivals, the more prepared use aromatic herb sachets tied close to the body, or rub plants like lavender or rosemary on their clothes and skin. These don't replace bathing but create an olfactory layer that competes with the natural odor. In medieval medical theory, this also protects against sickly miasmas, those malignant vapors that everyone knows cause diseases. Some even hang small bags of aromatic herbs around their necks, serving as double amulets against bad smell and the evil eye. Speaking of more urgent physiological needs, you probably need to relieve your bladder or bowels after a night's sleep. The options are limited and none of them involve flushing or toilet paper. At best, your house has a specific bucket for this purpose. At worst, or if the bucket is already dangerously full, you simply go outside and find a suitably discreet location. Discreet being a relative term when you live in grouped huts with practically no privacy. Larger villages may have community latrines, essentially holes over pits or streams. These are surprisingly important social locations where gossip is exchanged along with other less verbal things. Social hierarchy is reflected even in these places. The newest or less stinky seats are tacitly reserved for the most influential community members. The real horror for modern sensibilities comes afterward, the post-evacuation cleaning. There is no toilet paper. Repeat that to yourself a few times to fully process it. The alternatives include soft leaves, seasonal, moss, if available, straw, abrasive, not recommended, pieces of broken pottery for the braver ones, or simply your left hand followed by a quick wash, if water is available. Some public latrines in larger cities have the luxurious communal anus stick, a rod with cloth wrapped around the tip, used by everyone and rarely washed. Yes, this was considered normal, believe it or not. The disposal of waste follows an equally enchanting procedure. The contents of night buckets are typically thrown out the nearest window, hence the historic warning. Water coming, before launching, deposited in compost heaps or taken to fields as fertilizer. In cities, the destination is often the street, creating those smelly streams in the center of pathways that women's long dresses happily drag everywhere. The lack of adequate sanitation isn't just a matter of discomfort or odor. It's a constant vector of diseases that kill millions during this period. Dysentery, cholera, typhoid fever all thrive in this environment. But for you, this is just how things are. You don't make the connection between your sanitary habits and the frequent diseases that regularly decimate your village. After all, everyone knows that diseases are caused by humoral imbalances, malignant miasmas, or, most likely, divine wrath for that impure thought you had last week. Your morning hygiene ritual is now complete, a process that consumed perhaps 5 minutes of your day and accomplished approximately 0 in terms of real cleanliness. You're ready for your next activity physically, not much different from when you woke up, except perhaps for a wet face and a few less lice. Congratulations, you've survived the medieval morning hygiene routine. Your teeth are still slowly rotting, your skin is covered by a film of dirt accumulated over weeks, and entire colonies of microorganisms consider your body an unexplored continent. But at least you're awake and ready to face another glorious day in the Middle Ages. And don't forget, complete bath at the next summer solstice. Mark it on the calendar you don't have. With your morning hygiene completed, a term used in the most generous sense possible, your stomach begins to protest audibly and insistently. It's time for breakfast, that first meal of the day that in the Middle Ages would have made modern nutritionists collapse into collective nervous breakdown. First, forget about that aromatic coffee that awakens your senses in the 21st century. Coffee? That exotic luxury is still confined to distant lands that you don't even know exist. The same goes for tea, hot chocolate, and practically any beverage that makes waking up civilized. Sugar, that substance you casually add in several spoonfuls to your modern breakfast, is a spice so rare and expensive that only nobles possess it. usually locked in small boxes as if it were gold dust, which, in practical terms, it is. Your breakfast won't happen immediately after waking. The medieval concept of morning fasting is quite literal. You'll often work several hours before putting any food in your stomach. The canonical hours of the church determine your daily rhythm, and the first meal usually happens after prime, first hour of prayer, or even after terce, third hour. Meanwhile, your body operates on the energy reserves from the scarce dinner the night before. When the moment to eat finally arrives, don't expect variety or presentation. The central element of your first meal is bread, a bread that would make modern artisan bakers retire from the profession in deep disgust. Medieval peasant bread is a dense, dark, and often smelly object, made mostly from rye or barley. The noble wheat is reserved for the wealthy. The flour is coarsely ground in local mills, often contaminated with tiny stones from the grinding process, great for wearing down your already compromised teeth, toxic weeds accidentally collected with the grain, and a generous portion of ergot, a fungus that, surprise, is a potent, natural hallucinogen. The occasional outbreaks of madness in medieval villages can often be traced back to particularly special batches of contaminated bread. The bread is baked in community ovens to save fuel, which means your family might bake bread only once a week. Consequently, by the end of the week, you're effectively eating a moldy brick that needs to be dipped in liquids to avoid breaking your remaining teeth. This mold, by the way, contains natural antibiotics. You're involuntarily medicating yourself while struggling to chew your breakfast. Penicillin was officially discovered centuries later, but your medieval body is already regularly ingesting primitive versions of it. To accompany this baked feast, you have your morning drink, beer. That's right, beer for breakfast, and we're not talking about problematic behavior. It's simply standard practice. Medieval small beer has low alcohol content, 1 to 3%, and serves as the main source of safe hydration. The available water is often contaminated while the fermentation process kills pathogens. Everyone drinks this beer, including children, from the earliest years of life. The brewing process for this beer happens at home or in the community. A mixture of grains, often the worst quality, unsuitable for bread, is fermented with wild yeasts, resulting in a cloudy, slightly acidic, and minimally alcoholic beverage. The taste would be considered horrible by modern standards. No carefully selected hops or refined brewing techniques. It's functional, not pleasurable, although after a lifetime of drinking this, you've developed a peculiar taste for the mixture. On good days, your first meal might include a bit of hard cheese, a dense, salty, and often rancid dairy product made from the milk of local goats or cows. This cheese bears little resemblance to the delicately aged products you find in gourmet shops in the future. It's a functional preservation food designed to store dairy protein for long periods. Its texture is often so hard that it practically needs to be scraped, and the flavor, well, let's say it's assertive, with notes of poorly cleaned stable and dirty sock. If the season allows, you might have access to eggs. A true protein gift. These aren't the standardized white and sanitized eggs from the modern supermarket. Medieval eggs vary dramatically in size and appearance, often dirty with feathers and excrement. After all, they come directly from under a chicken. Boiled in water or fried in animal fat reused for weeks, they add precious protein to your diet. Occasionally, when breaking an egg, you find a partially formed chick, extra protein. Nothing is wasted in the medieval food economy. The concept of freshness in food deserves special attention. For you, fresh food simply means not yet visibly spoiled or with rotten parts that can be removed. Your tolerance for food in early stages of decomposition would be shocking to Modern palates. A slight acidic taste in the cheese, just an indicator of character. The slight greenish tone in the bread crust, just an interesting visual feature. The occasional small insects found in your food are simply an unexpected source of protein, and you don't even notice most of them. The table where you consume this inspiring meal is in fact often just a bench or communal board. Utensils? You own a personal wooden spoon, your most precious possession. For feeding, it was probably carved by a family member and may have personal inscriptions or marks. You carry it with you for special occasions outside the home. Knives are multi-purpose tools, not specific for meals, and forks. That effeminate and unnecessary utensil is still considered an eccentricity in many European courts, let alone on your peasant table. You don't eat on individual plates, but in shared bowls or trays. Family hierarchy determines the order of access. The father, or eldest member, usually has the first choice of the best pieces. Children come last, learning early their place in the social order. This practice of sharing also efficiently shares any diseases that a family member might be incubating. An unintentional system of cross-inoculation that occasionally strengthens the immune system when it doesn't kill. Hunger is your normal state. The modern concept of satiety, that comfortable feeling of being satisfied after a meal, is practically unknown to you. Even after breakfast, your stomach still growls slightly. You're accustomed to operating with a chronic caloric deficit. Your medieval body has adapted to function in a state of perpetual mild malnutrition, with periods of acute hunger interspersed seasonally. The dietary differences between social classes are glaring. While you chew your hard, dark bread with diluted beer, the feudal lord in the nearby property is enjoying refined white breads, roasted meats, preserved fruits, and even exotic spices. The inequality isn't just economic, but literally embodied in your respective bodies. The nobles are often taller, heavier, and live longer thanks to substantially different diets. Your diet of approximately 1,500 to 2,000 daily calories, when you're lucky, contrasts with the 4,000 to 5,000 calories consumed by the nobility. The preparation of this morning feast falls primarily on the women of the house, who have already been awake for some time, maintaining the fire, fetching water, and organizing the family's food day. The fire in the center of the hut is kept constantly lit. Relighting it is an arduous task that consumes precious time and materials. This same fire that cooks your food also fills the hut with smoke, as efficient ventilation systems are an architectural luxury not yet popularized. Your lungs, like those of all medievals, are permanently blackened by this constant exposure, creating a chronic cough that you consider normal. When the meal is finished, you clean your precious spoon by rubbing it on your clothes, which already serves as a bacteriological culture on fabric, and carefully store it. The bowl is quickly passed through water if available, or simply rubbed with a cloth. Excessive cleaning is a waste of resources, and besides, the residual layer of fat helps preserve the wooden utensils. Efficient. With your stomach partially satisfied, you're ready to face the next hours of work. The energy provided by this nutritionally deficient breakfast, but caloric enough to keep you alive, will fuel your body only until the next meal, if there is one. In times of scarcity or religious fasting periods, which occupy almost a third of the annual medieval calendar, you might spend the entire day with only this meal in your stomach. Congratulations, you've survived the medieval breakfast. Your digestive system is now processing a collection of low-quality carbohydrates, various microorganisms, and perhaps some intestinal parasites as an unsolicited bonus. Your medieval body, however, possesses a gut flora adapted to these challenges, an evolutionary advantage that you'll never consciously appreciate. It's time to go out to work with your mouth still guarding the persistent flavor of moldy bread and morning beer. Spoiler: lunch won't be much better. With your stomach partially full of dubious bread and morning beer, it's time for the true purpose of your medieval existence. Work. Not just any work, brutal, endless, and unrecognized agricultural work. Forget LinkedIn, resumes, and performance evaluations. Your career was chosen even before your birth and will continue unchanged until your premature death. Welcome to the medieval labor market, where the only career option is not starving to death, and the only benefit is maybe surviving until tomorrow. You leave home when the sky is still in the dawn twilight. In summer, this means around 4 in the morning. In winter, you have the luxury of starting a little later. Although the cutting cold compensates for any supposed comfort of this extended sleeping time, there are no weekends, no vacations, and the only day with slightly reduced work is Sunday. And even then, only the time necessary to attend Mass and hear how your poverty is virtuous in God's eyes. Before departing for the fields, you and other workers may gather briefly. There are mumbled prayers, instructions shouted by the local overseer, perhaps even crude jokes. Humor has always been a human survival strategy, even when there is absolutely nothing funny about your situation. The group divides according to the day's tasks. Today is corvée day, mandatory work on the feudal lord's lands. Tomorrow, if you survive, you might work on your own miserable piece of land. Your tools are masterpieces of ergonomic torture. The wooden plough with an iron tip is pulled by oxen, stubborn, slow animals, but essential to the community's survival. So essential, in fact, that in many cases they are more valuable than you. If there's a severe famine, guess who will be fed first? Hint: it's not the biped holding the plough. The loss of an ox is an economic catastrophe. The loss of a peasant is just any Tuesday. This plough weighs approximately 40 kilograms, and you need to hold it firmly to maintain a straight furrow while walking kilometers behind the animals on irregular ground, often rocky or waterlogged. Your forearms burn after minutes, your back protests after an hour, and after a whole day, your entire body is a symphony of muscular agony. Ergonomics is a concept that will only be invented in about 900 years, so don't expect personalized adjustments or padded handles. The other tools in your arsenal of suffering are no friendlier. The sickle, with its curved and pointed blade, is designed to efficiently cut grains, and occasionally inattentive fingers. The flail, used to separate grains from straw, is basically 2 pieces of heavy wood connected by leather, specifically created to test your reflexes. One moment of distraction, and you earn a cranial trauma as a bonus. The rake and shovel have coarse handles that leave splinters in your already calloused hands, and the hoe seems to have been designed by a sadist with deep hatred for the human spine. The feudal system under which you work deserves a detailed explanation, not because it's complex, but because it's a masterpiece of institutionalized exploitation. As a serf or villain, no, not a villainous character, it's a villain, a semi-free peasant. You're bound to the land, you're not technically a slave, which would be an offense to your Christian lords. You just can't leave, don't own the land you work, and must deliver a substantial part of everything you produce to the legal owner. Your obligations include working several days a week, usually 2 or 3, exclusively on the Lord's lands. This work, called corvée, is your contribution for the privilege of occupying your own miserable hut and cultivating a piece of land for your subsistence. Additionally, you must pay taxes in the form of products, a portion of your grains, animals, eggs, or anything you manage to produce. In some regions, there are even additional fees to use the Lord's mill, mandatory, his oven, mandatory, or for marriage permission, surprisingly, also mandatory. Oh, and don't forget the tithe for the church, 10% of everything, even before the Lord takes his part. God and nobility, always first in line when it comes to dividing your misery. Your body is the main work machine, and like any medieval machine, it's mistreated, poorly maintained, and pushed beyond its limits. Your hands have developed calluses so thick that small thorns are no longer noticed. Your fingers are often slightly deformed by poorly healed fractures or early arthritis. Your back, considering the amount of weight you carry daily, probably has several disc herniations that will never be diagnosed, only felt as constant pain that you accept as a normal part of existence. Your knees and hips protest with each movement after 25 years, practically advanced middle age by medieval standards. Your neck and shoulders are permanently tense from carrying heavy burdens. Your skin, constantly exposed to sun, wind, and rain, has the texture of leather by 30 years old. You age at accelerated speed, your body consumed by the merciless work that the system demands. The workday is regulated by the sun, not by the clock. You work from dawn to dusk with brief intervals marked by church bells. In summer, this can mean 16 hours of daily work. In winter, the hours are fewer, but compensated by debilitating cold and often impossible conditions. During critical periods, planting and harvesting, you work to the absolute limit of human endurance, often sleeping in the fields to maximize productive time. Rest breaks are minimal and always accompanied by guilt for unproductivity. No, one is exempt from this regime. Children begin to work as soon as they can hold a tool or scare birds from the fields, usually at 5 or 6 years old. Tasks are distributed by age and ability. Small children take care of smaller animals or collect twigs. Teenagers already fully participate in most adult tasks. There is no childhood as a protected concept. There is only miniature adult, not yet fully productive. Women live in a particularly brutal work regime. In addition to participating in agricultural tasks along with men, yes, they also plough, sow and harvest, they maintain all domestic work, food preparation, clothing manufacturing, from spinning to sewing, childcare, maintenance of the family garden, food processing for storage, and much more. Pregnancy and breastfeeding are not considered reasons for reducing workload. Women often give birth in the fields during harvest and return to work hours later, newborn tied to their backs. Your interaction with animals is constant and rarely romantic. The draft oxen, essential for ploughing, are stubborn creatures that occasionally decide to stop completely or change direction without warning. Pigs, the main sources of protein for winter, are surprisingly intelligent, aggressive, and potentially lethal, especially sows protecting piglets. Chickens are stupid, but efficient at escaping exactly when you need to catch them. Each animal is simultaneously a precious resource and a stressful responsibility. Its premature death can mean starvation for the family. The dangers of agricultural work are constant and often fatal. Injuries with tools are common, from simple cuts that become infected to accidental amputations. Large animals can kick, bite, or simply crush an inattentive worker. The weather represents another perpetual danger. Sunstroke in summer, hypothermia in winter, lightning during storms, falling trees during clearing, drowning in irrigation canals, accidental poisonings during plant collection. The list is endless, and your body carries scars from each survived encounter. And if you work too slowly or seem to be avoiding heavy work, well, there's an efficient incentive system for that. The overseer, usually a slightly more privileged peasant, is authorized to apply immediate physical punishments. Whips and rods aren't just animal control tools. More serious transgressions can lead to fines, as if you had any money, confiscation of goods, as if you had anything valuable, or public exposure in stocks or pillories. This you have in abundance, shame and discomfort. The most efficient control system, however, is the community itself. In a system where individual failures affect collective production, your own neighbors become vigilantes of your productivity. Laziness isn't just discouraged, it's actively punished through social ostracism, which in an interdependent community can be a death sentence. The result of this regime is a permanently exhausted body. You never, literally never, experience the sensation of being completely rested. Your normal state is manageable chronic fatigue punctuated by periods of absolute exhaustion. Muscle and joint pain are your sensory baseline. Your hands, even when relaxed, maintain a permanent curvature molded by the tools you hold daily. Your feet have developed specific deformities adapted to the local terrain. You are essentially a human tool being used until you break. And when you break, when your body finally gives in to decades of abuse, you will be unceremoniously replaced, just as you would replace the broken handle of a hoe. In the medieval economy, you are a renewable resource, easily replaced by the next generation of sacrificial bodies that you yourself generated. At noon, exhausted and hungry, you are entitled to a brief pause for a frugal lunch, a meal that, as we shall see next, will hardly compensate for the energy expenditure of your last hours of effort. But it's all you'll have. The church bell rings in the distance, marking the 6th hour. Your muscles tremble with fatigue as you briefly sit down to consume what passes for lunch in the medieval diet. Congratulations, you've survived the morning work. Just 8 more hours of physical torture until sunset. Spoiler: it doesn't get easier from here on out. The distant church bell marks the 6th hour, and your body begs for fuel after hours of grueling work. It's time for lunch, though calling this brief. Interlude a meal is as generous as calling a puddle a swamp. You sit in the scant shade of a tree or at the edge of a field, along with other equally exhausted workers. There's no full-hour break as in your modern privileges. You have perhaps 30 minutes to recharge your body before returning to toil. From a small cloth bag tied at your waist, you pull out your portable lunch. The contents are predictable: more bread, now even harder after hours under the sun. Perhaps a piece of rancid cheese or, on better days, a chunk of salted bacon so hard it could be used as a carpentry tool. This is a meal conceived purely for functionality, enough calories to prevent you from fainting before sunset. Flavor entirely optional. Food preservation is a constant concern in your medieval existence. Without refrigeration, each preservation technique is an exercise in choose your poison. Salting, the preferred method for meats and fish, preserves food by transforming it into practically geological objects so saturated with salt that microorganisms reconsider their life strategy. The same salt that preserves your food also ensures that you are permanently dehydrated and have high blood pressure. Not that any medieval doctor would diagnose that. Smoking offers an aromatic alternative involving prolonged exposure of food to smoke from selected woods. The result tastes mainly of a smoke. The tar compounds that preserve the meat are also slowly preserving your lungs and other internal organs, although this is not an advertised feature of the product. Fermentation, letting beneficial bacteria and fungi dominate your food before the harmful ones do, produces an impressive variety of acidic, bubbling, questionably smelling foods that your medieval palate has learned to interpret as delicious. Sauerkraut, cheeses, some beers and wines, all are essentially foods in controlled decomposition that you've learned to appreciate because the alternative is hunger. As for drying, this depends entirely on the capricious climate. In a good year, you have dried fruits, dehydrated meats, and preserved herbs. In a wet year, you have colourful mould and food waste. It's a constant gamble against the elements, and the bets are paid in lost meals. Back to your lunch, you methodically chew the hard bread, occasionally dipping it in a small amount of beer you brought in a leather container, not to improve the flavour, but to make it physically possible to swallow without lacerating your throat. If you are particularly foresighted or privileged, you might have an onion or a small radish to complement. Vegetables that survive transportation well and add something vaguely resembling flavour to the meal. The main dishes of medieval peasant cuisine rarely appear in the countryside lunch. These are reserved for the evening meal, when there is time and fire to prepare them. The centre of substantial medieval nutrition is pottage, a term encompassing anything, slowly cooked in a pot. Imagine a perpetual stew where new ingredients are added as available, while the base broth might be weeks or even months old. This dish is simultaneously soup, stew, and self-sustaining microbiological ecosystem. The exact composition of pottage varies by season, region, and level of desperation. At the base is some type of cereal, barley, oats, or legumes like peas and broad beans. To these are added available vegetables, turnips, carrots, onions, leeks, cabbage, basically anything that grows in the local soil and isn't immediately toxic. Animal protein is limited, often reduced to bones for flavour, tiny bits of bacon, or, on feast days, small portions of actual meat. The cooking method is simple in theory, brutally inefficient in practice. An iron cauldron, a precious possession passed down through generations, is hung over the central fire of the hut. There is no temperature control beyond moving the cauldron closer to or further from the flames, or adjusting the fire itself. Cooking is slow, consuming precious firewood that you probably collected by violating some local forest laws. Smoke fills the hut, ensuring that you will effectively be smoking your own lungs along with dinner. Cooking utensils are minimal and multifunctional. A large knife serves for both cutting vegetables and slaughtering animals or defending against intruders. Wooden spoons, 1 or 2 iron pots, and perhaps a frying pan comprise the complete culinary arsenal. Nothing is specialized, everything is used until it literally disintegrates. The sensory profile of medieval foods would be shocking to modern palates. Rancidity is an accepted and expected flavor note, not a sign that something should be discarded. Animal fat stored for months naturally develops a harsh aroma that your medieval palate interprets simply as intense rather than spoiled. The slight flavor of mold in bread is so common that its absence would be strange. Vegetables often have a pronounced bitterness. Centuries of selective agriculture have not yet eliminated the natural defensive compounds of plants. If you think spices could save this gustatory landscape, think again. Pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. These are literally luxury products traded by weight in gold and completely out of reach for peasants. Your repertoire of seasonings is limited to locally grown herbs, sage, thyme, rosemary, and similar. Salt is the only mineral seasoning available, and even this is used sparingly due to cost. The result is a surprisingly limited flavor palette, where subtle variations of bitter, salty, and moldy constitute the entire gastronomic experience. To supplement the basic diet, gathering wild plants is a constant activity mainly performed by women and children. Young nettles, dandelion, sorrel, plants now considered weeds, are vital sources of nutrients. Knowledge about which plants are edible is passed orally and learned through observation from childhood. Mistakes in this department can be fatal. several edible plants have toxic lookalikes practically identical to untrained eyes. Every village has stories about the child or elderly person who ate the wrong herb and never woke up. Hunting could provide valuable protein, but here the feudal system shows its calculated oppression again. Hunting is an exclusive privilege of the nobility. Deer, wild boars, rabbits, and even certain birds are the legal property of the local lord. Being caught hunting illegally, which for you means basically any hunting, can result in devastating fines, mutilation such as loss of hands, or even execution, depending on how vindictive your lord is. This doesn't prevent poaching from happening, of course. Simple traps are placed in discreet locations designed to capture small animals silently. Snares for rabbits, nets for birds, and occasionally poisons for fish are used with extreme discretion. Each furtive expedition is a calculation of risk against reward. Is the additional protein worth the possibility of brutal punishment? Often, when the stomach growls loudly enough, the answer is yes. The annual cycle of food availability creates a predictable pattern of relative abundance and absolute scarcity. After the late summer and autumn harvest, there is a brief period of adequate feeding. The peak is the harvest festival, perhaps the only time of year when you experience something remotely resembling satiety. From there, the countdown begins. Stocks slowly decrease during winter, reaching critical levels in late winter and early spring, the period known as the hunger time. This cycle is reflected in your own body. Modest weight gain in autumn, progressive loss during winter, and a period of dangerous thinness in spring before the first fresh foods of the new season appear. Your metabolism has adapted to this annual pattern of feast and famine, efficiently storing fat during brief periods of abundance. Hunger is not an extraordinary event. It's a recurring visitor, practically a family member. In good years, it manifests only as a constant feeling of emptiness in the stomach and chronic irritability during the lean months. In bad years, when harvests fail or winters extend, it transforms into truly debilitating hunger, extreme weakness, inability to maintain body heat, mental apathy, and eventually death. Family decisions during periods of severe scarcity follow a brutal logic of survival. Adults of productive age receive food priority as they are essential for obtaining the next supply. Small children and the elderly often suffer the worst effects of hunger. It is no coincidence that infant and elderly mortality spikes in late winter. This is not conscious cruelty, it's survival mathematics in a system without safety margins. The moments of dietary exception are rare and, therefore, deeply meaningful. Religious feasts mark brief intervals of relative indulgence, Christmas, Easter, and some important saints' days. Weddings and baptisms, when possible, are scheduled to coincide with periods of greater food abundance. In these events, the menu does not change radically in content, but in quantity. It's the rare opportunity to eat until feeling satisfied, a sensation so unusual that it often results in intense digestive discomfort. A celebratory medieval peasant feast would still be considered absurdly modest by modern standards. Perhaps a slightly better bread, a larger portion of meat in the stew, some form of dessert sweetened with honey, the only accessible sweetener. Drink flows more freely, beer or cider in quantities that ensure that, at least for one night, you can briefly forget the harshness of your existence. The nutritional consequences of this diet are evident in every medieval body. Chronic deficiencies of specific vitamins produce characteristic symptoms: scurvy, vitamin C deficiency, with its bleeding gums and wounds that don't heal; rickets, vitamin D deficiency, with weak bones and deformities; pellagra, niacin deficiency, with its skin eruptions and neurological problems. Physical development is chronically compromised. You are significantly shorter than your modern descendants will be. Your bones show multiple Harris lines, markers of interrupted growth due to periodic malnutrition. Your teeth began to fail in adolescence, and by 30 years old, if you're lucky enough to reach that age, you've probably already lost several. The inadequate mineral content in the diet makes bones susceptible to fractures that, poorly healed, result in the common deformities seen in medieval skeletons. With your modest lunch finished, you put away the now empty cloth bag. The bell rings again, signaling the end of the brief rest. Still hungry, you get up with protesting muscles and return to work. The afternoon sun beats mercilessly on your back, and you know there are still hours ahead before you can return to the hut for the main meal of the day. Your stomach already growls in anticipation, knowing that even dinner will not bring true satisfaction. Congratulations, you've survived the medieval lunch. Your caloric intake so far today has provided approximately half of what you've already burned, and your body is operating in chronic deficit, as it has done throughout your life. The afternoon work will be even more grueling, and the dangers you will face will not be diminished by your state of constant semi-starvation. But this is just another day in your medieval existence, perpetually hungry, perpetually exhausted, perpetually surviving. For now, you've survived the anemic lunch and the grueling afternoon of work. Congratulations! This is literally an achievement in the Middle Ages, where each sunset reached with all limbs intact deserves a small mental celebration. Because you see, while you worry about trivialities like chronic hunger and muscle exhaustion, an impressive variety of threats are actively competing for the privilege of ending your miserable existence. Death is not that distant figure relegated to hospitals and nursing homes, as in your comfortable 21st century. Here it is an intrusive neighbor who visits without warning, frequently, and without discrimination. Death is so omnipresent that you've already seen more corpses by age 12 than a modern human will see in an entire lifetime. Bodies are washed at home, watched over in the local church, and buried in brief, practical ceremonies. There is no time for prolonged mourning, the living need to continue working. Funerals are regular events in the community, punctuating the calendar with the same frequency as seasonal festivals. Small children are particularly susceptible, so susceptible that many families don't even officially name babies until they survive a few months, a practice of preventive emotional distancing that says a lot about medieval reality. You've probably lost several siblings before they reached walking age and consider this perfectly normal. The normalization of death creates a strange relationship with mortality. On one hand, there is pragmatic fatalism. Death can come at any moment, for countless reasons, and there isn't much you can do. On the other, there is a desperate attachment to protective superstitions and rituals in the hope of gaining some measure of control over the uncontrollable. Speaking of control, law and order as you know it in the future simply doesn't exist. Rural areas are particularly vulnerable to bandits, usually desperate peasants who have abandoned their lands, soldiers discharged after conflicts, or simply men brutalized by a brutal system. These groups occupy nearby forests, attacking travelers and occasionally small villages. Roads are especially dangerous. Traveling alone is practically an invitation to be attacked, robbed, and left in a ditch, if you're lucky. If not, you might be kidnapped for ransom, unlikely, given your minimal economic value, or simply murdered for fun or for your ragged clothes. This is why travel typically happens in groups, with merchants often paying for armed protection or joining other travelers for numerical safety. Your village has rudimentary methods of community defense, night watchmen, an alarm system, usually a bell or horn, and the understanding that all able-bodied men must respond in case of attack. But this protection is improvised and often ineffective against organized attacks. There is no police to call, no emergency number to dial. Justice is local, arbitrary, and often brutal when applied. While humans represent significant danger, nature doesn't lag behind in its attempt to eliminate you from the population register. Wolves still roam medieval Europe in considerable numbers, and attacks on humans, particularly children or lone individuals, are not uncommon, especially during severe winters when game is scarce. Stories of children devoured by wolves are not fairy tales invented to scare disobedient little ones. They are practical warnings based on real incidents. Bears, although less common than wolves, still inhabit denser forests and represent a lethal threat. Wild boars are possibly even more dangerous. Temperamental, equipped with sharp tusks, and fast enough to eviscerate a human before the victim realizes what happened. This is why hunting these animals is traditionally a noble sport, not only for social status, but because it requires weapons and training that peasants simply do not possess. Ironically, your own domestic animals often cause more deaths than wild predators. Frightened horses, enraged oxen, even pigs, which occasionally develop the disturbing habit of devouring small children, feature among everyday dangers. A horse kick can easily break bones or cause permanent brain damage. An ox that suddenly decides it doesn't like your presence can transform your internal organs into paste with a quick movement of its horns. Even safe animals like dairy cows kill several peasants annually. Within the relative safety of your home, other dangers wait. Fire is perhaps the most feared domestic threat. In dwellings built mainly of wood, straw, and other highly flammable materials where the main source of illumination is unprotected candles and heating comes from open fireplaces, fires are terrifyingly common. A single burning house often means an entire village reduced to ashes within hours. There are no hydrants, hoses, or professional firefighters, just buckets passed desperately from hand to hand in a usually futile attempt to contain the flames. Accidental poisonings occur with alarming regularity. Toxic plants are confused with edible ones, poisonous mushrooms are collected by mistake, and even cooking utensils can be a source of danger. Pots and cups made of improper materials slowly poison their users with lead or other heavy metals. Falls are particularly dangerous in a world without modern orthopedic surgery. A broken leg can mean slow death by starvation if you cannot work, or at minimum, permanent disability. Irregular stairs, uneven floors, work at heights without safety equipment. The medieval built environment seems specifically designed to maximize the potential for serious accidents. The natural world is not content with just predators, it also throws its meteorological fury against you. Storms are not just inconveniences that prevent picnics, they are potentially catastrophic events. Lightning frequently strikes open fields where you work, transforming unwary peasants into instant human charcoal. Your house, built without modern construction standards, can literally collapse during strong winds or be ripped from its foundations by flash floods. Speaking of floods, these not only threaten your life directly, but also destroy entire harvests, ensuring hunger in the following months. The same applies to prolonged droughts, devastating hail, or late frosts that kill young crops. Each climatic extreme carries with it not only the immediate danger, but the promise of future scarcity. The interpretation of these natural events adds another layer to your medieval psychological distress. A particularly violent storm is not just a meteorological phenomenon, it's a sign of divine wrath. That failed harvest, clearly punishment for some unconfessed community sin, the birth of a two-headed calf, an obvious omen of impending disasters. Each anomaly, each natural disaster is loaded with supernatural meaning, creating a perpetual state of spiritual anxiety about what the heavens might send next. Winters are particularly deadly. Beyond the extreme cold that can directly kill through hypothermia, the isolation caused by severe blizzards means that entire villages can be without vital supplies for weeks. In poorly insulated, inadequately heated huts, the very young and the very old succumb silently during the night, their bodies often kept in the house itself until the ground thaws enough to bury them. If the forces of nature and occasional criminals weren't enough, there is still officially sanctioned violence. Wars between nobles rarely involve the nobles themselves dying in large numbers. It's the peasants who form the bulk of armies, and it's peasant lands that suffer the worst of pillaging, rape, and destruction that accompany conflicts. Even without formal battles, simple territorial disputes between feudal lords can result in your crops being burned as a pressure tactic, your animals confiscated, and your women and daughters raped as a demonstration of power. Soldiers in transit, even those technically on your side, are often indistinguishable from invaders in their behavior. They requisition food, drink, and shelter, taking by force what is not given voluntarily. Resistance rarely ends well for the peasant. Unemployed mercenaries between wars are even worse. Bands of violent men trained to kill and without fixed income, wandering the countryside in search of profit opportunities through whatever means necessary. The official representatives of authority are not much better. The tax collector is a universally feared figure, arriving with armed guards and precise lists of what you owe to the lord or crown. It doesn't matter if the harvest failed or if your child is dying of fever. The amount will be collected, even if through the confiscation of the few goods you possess. The bailiffs and supervisors of the feudal lord have almost unlimited authority over your life, and appeals against their abuses are practically non-existent. Medieval justice is a horror spectacle designed more to entertain and intimidate than to correct. Public executions are not rare events conducted discreetly. They are community festivities, often held on market days, to ensure maximum spectators. Children are taken to watch hangings, beheadings, and occasionally more creative methods of execution. The pedagogy behind this is clear. See what happens to those who break the rules. For non-capital crimes, punishments such as mutilation, cutting of ears, hands, or tongue, public whipping, or exposure in the pillory are common. These are not only painful at the moment, they often result in permanent disability, ensuring that the criminal, who may have done something as horrible as stealing bread when hungry, will carry a visible and debilitating reminder of their crime for the rest of their life. When night falls and you finally return to the relative safety of your hut, the dangers only change form. Fear of the unknown, creatures that roam in darkness, malignant spirits, neighbors practicing witchcraft, feeds a nocturnal terror that the absolute darkness of the medieval night only intensifies. Each strange sound, each shadow cast by the flickering light of the fire may contain supernatural or very real threats. Spoiler: it doesn't end well. The dangers you face daily would render a modern human a trembling psychiatric patient within days. You, however, have developed extraordinary resilience, not because you're especially brave, but because there is simply no alternative. Surviving until tomorrow is the only possible victory, and to achieve it, you must navigate an endless labyrinth of deadly threats with inadequate tools and incomplete knowledge. Good luck with that. You're going to need it. If you manage to survive the chronic dangers of medieval life, bandits, hungry wolves, catastrophic fires, and the occasional forced requisitioned by some nobles' troops. Congratulations! Now it's time to face what will really kill you, your own traitorous body, and the bacteria, viruses, and parasites that consider you a walking 5-star buffet. Welcome to the medieval healthcare system, where the cure is often worse than the disease, and doctors have exactly the same chance of saving you as a tossed coin, except the coin charges less. The foundation of all medieval medical knowledge lies in the theory of the four humours, an elegant, complete, and absolutely wrong system about how the human body works. According to this sophisticated theory, your health depends on the perfect balance between four bodily fluids: blood, hot and wet; phlegm, cold and wet; yellow bile, hot and dry; and black bile, cold and dry. Any disease, whether a simple cough or a fatal brain tumour, results from an imbalance of these humours. Diagnosis is simply identifying which humour is in excess or deficiency. Elegant, isn't it? There's just one small problem: it's completely wrong. To determine which humour is imbalanced, your medieval doctor, if you're affluent enough to consult one, will perform a sophisticated analysis by observing your urine in a glass flask against the light. The colour, consistency, smell, and even taste, yes, medieval doctors routinely tasted urine, will determine your diagnosis. If you think this seems unscientific, wait until you see the treatment. The most universally applied treatment for practically any condition is bloodletting. The reasoning is impeccable in its simplicity. If you're sick, you clearly have excess humour, so some must be removed. And which humour is easiest to extract? Blood, obviously. The beauty of this system is that it can be applied to practically any condition. Fever, bloodletting; cough, bloodletting; yellowed skin, bloodletting; broken limbs, believe it or not, bloodletting. The methods of bloodletting are varied and equally charming. The most basic use is lancets, small, sharp blades with which the doctor, barber surgeon, or even a skilled peasant opens a vein, usually at the bend of the elbow. Blood gushes cheerfully into a bowl until the practitioner decides you've lost enough blood. A scientific calculation based on, well, educated guessing. If you're wondering how much is enough blood, the answer varies from a few spoonfuls to several cups, depending on the severity of the disease and the patient's resistance. Spoiler: people frequently fainted during the procedure, which was considered a positive sign that balance was being restored. For more delicate conditions, there are leeches, small vampiric creatures that your doctor strategically applies across the body. These are particularly valued because they bite and suck precisely the right amount of blood before letting go, satisfied. Some more affluent doctors carry their own personal collections of leeches in small vials, creating a professional bond with their tools that is simultaneously admirable and disturbing. When not draining your vital fluids, medieval medical practitioners resort to an impressive pharmacopoeia of substances ranging from genuinely effective to absolutely lethal. Herbal knowledge passed down through generations identified plants with legitimate medicinal properties. Willow, containing salicin, precursor to aspirin, for pain and fevers. Foxglove, containing digitalis, for heart problems. Herbs like thyme and garlic with proven antibacterial properties. Unfortunately, these effective remedies share space with concoctions based more on superstition than clinical observation. Unicorn horn powder, actually ground ivory, for impotence. Lizard blood for epilepsy. Excrement of various animals for skin infections. Medieval medicine operates by the logic that the rarer, more expensive, or more disgusting the ingredient, the more powerful the remedy must be. The diseases against which these brave doctors fight are varied and omnipresent. Fevers of all kinds, typhoid, malaria, influenza, are simply classified by duration and intensity with no understanding of the causative pathogens. Gastrointestinal diseases are so common due to sanitary conditions that having diarrhea is practically your default intestinal state. Respiratory infections transform a simple cold into fatal pneumonia with frightening efficiency, especially during winter months. But the true star of the medieval pathological show is without doubt the Black Death. This bacterial celebrity deserves special mention for its ability to efficiently kill between 30% and 60% of the European population in its various appearances. The plague is not a one-time event. It returns in cycles like a macabre TV series with multiple seasons, each bringing refinements to the terror it causes. You can identify it by the classic progression. First, infected rat fleas lovingly nibble you, injecting Yersinia pestis into your bloodstream. Next, you develop the characteristic buboes, painful black swellings in the armpits, neck, and groin, which can grow to the size of an apple. Fever, chills, and excruciating pain are just the beginning. The grand finale can be either death by sepsis in approximately 5 days, or, for the lucky ones who contract the pulmonary version, drowning in your own fluids while coughing blood within hours. The treatment for plague? Bloodletting, obviously, aromatic. Herbs to ward off the causative miasma. And prayers. Lots of prayers. Alternatively, you can try the preventive method preferred by more sophisticated doctors, fleeing the infected city as quickly as possible. Not coincidentally, this is the only approach with any statistical efficacy. While plague kills quickly and dramatically, leprosy, which in the Middle Ages included various skin diseases unrelated to modern Hansen's disease, offers a slow-motion horror spectacle. The diagnosis of leprosy is not just medical, it's a sentence of civil death. The leper undergoes a literal ritual of living death. A funeral mass is held, while the patient, covered by a black cloak, lies in an open coffin. After being declared legally dead, the leper is banished to a leper colony or forced to live in isolation, carrying a bell or rattle to warn the healthy of their approach. The leper's family suffers by association. Their children face marriage restrictions. Their properties are confiscated. Their social status crumbles. All this for conditions that included everything from true Hansen's disease to psoriasis, vitiligo, or persistent fungal infections. You are not prepared for this. Internal parasites are so common, they're practically considered part of the digestive system. Tapeworms, several meters long, comfortably cohabitate your intestines, generously feeding on your already inadequate nutritional intake. Roundworms are so prevalent in children that symptoms such as distended belly and paleness are considered normal features of childhood, not signs of massive infestation. The treatments for these intestinal tenants are surprisingly effective, though brutal. Preparations of pumpkin seeds, industrial quantities of garlic, or tobacco solutions administered as enemas manage to expel many parasites, along with any desire the patient might have to undergo a second treatment. When you literally defecate a 3-meter tapeworm after one of these therapies, the experience tends to remain permanently etched in your psyche. For women, the most dangerous medical event is not disease, but something perfectly natural: childbirth. This process, which in modern societies has mortality below 0.1%, carries in the Middle Ages a terrifying risk of 1 to 5% maternal death per birth. Considering that a typical medieval woman might become pregnant 10 to 15 times during her reproductive life, the mathematics is relentless. Many will not survive motherhood. Childbirth occurs at home, usually with the laboring woman sitting on a special chair or kneeling on fresh straw. Midwives, experienced women with practical knowledge but no formal training, conduct the process as they learned from their predecessors. Complications such as breech presentation, eclampsia, or postpartum hemorrhage are often a death sentence, treated with a combination of risky physical maneuvers and fervent prayers. When the baby is born alive, which occurs in about 80% of cases, another statistical struggle immediately begins. Approximately half will not reach their 5th birthday. The postpartum period for the mother is absurdly short by modern standards. Peasant women often return to heavy work days or even hours after giving birth, dramatically increasing the risk of complications. Should you suffer any trauma requiring surgical intervention, prepare yourself for an unforgettable experience. Medieval anesthesia consists basically of intoxicating the patient with strong alcohol, administering extracts of poppy, opium, or mandrake when available, or simply holding the victim firmly while they scream. Many patients die of shock during more complex procedures, which, considering the surgical conditions, may be considered a mercy. Speed is the most valued skill in a medieval surgeon. A good limb amputator can remove a leg below the knee in less than 2 minutes, cauterize bleeding vessels with red-hot iron, to the olfactory delight of all present who enjoy the aroma of burned human flesh, and move on to the next patient before the first has finished their first scream of agony. Medical professionals form a curious hierarchy. At the top are university physicians, men, exclusively men, educated in Latin who rarely touch patients, preferring to diagnose through distant observation and analysis of bodily fluids. These sophisticated gentlemen delegate manual work to barber surgeons, who besides cutting hair and trimming beards, extract teeth, perform bloodletting and conduct simple surgeries. At the base of the pyramid are local healers, frequently women with herbal knowledge transmitted orally, midwives with practical experience, and village wise ones with varied abilities. These unlicensed practitioners often possess the most effective treatments based on generations of direct observation, but are constantly under threat of witchcraft accusations, particularly if many of their patients survive, which would be obviously suspicious. Amputations are perhaps the most common surgical procedure, thanks to the perfect combination of frequent infections, severe work injuries, and absence of antibiotics. The process is terrifyingly simple: a saw, a sharp knife, a hot, cauterizing tool, and much strength to hold down the patient. The limb is removed, larger vessels are cauterized or tied if the surgeon is particularly skilled, and the stump is bandaged with clean linen, hopefully. If you survive the shock, hemorrhage and pain, you'll still have to face the almost certain infection of the wound. Gas gangrene and tetanus are frequent post-surgical visitors, often requiring additional amputations higher up the limb. A charming cycle that inevitably ends in death, or in the removal of so much of the body that there's nothing left to amputate. For the lucky ones who survive with just one lost limb, life continues with improvised adaptations. Rudimentary wooden legs, wooden crutches, or simply dragging oneself across the floor are the available mobility options. Lost hands are replaced by simple hooks or rudimentary wooden prosthetics with minimal functionality. Your work capacity, and therefore your social value, dramatically diminishes unless you develop impressive compensatory skills. Permeating the entire medieval medical system is religion, inseparable from healing practices. Each disease has a specialized patron saint: Saint Apollonia for toothaches, Saint Roch for plague victims, Saint Margaret for women in labor. Sacred relics, fragments of bones, tissues, or objects associated with saints are considered as effective or more effective than physical treatments. Pilgrimages to healing shrines are prescribed for particularly difficult cases. Monasteries frequently serve as the only available hospitals, combining rudimentary physical care with intense spiritual support. Patients are strategically placed where they can see the altar throughout their stay, ensuring that even if the body doesn't heal, the soul is properly prepared for the imminent departure. The efficacy of medieval medicine? Approximately the same as doing absolutely nothing, with the difference that doing nothing rarely causes additional harm, while many medieval treatments actively accelerate your departure from this vale of tears. Bloodletting weakens already debilitated patients, violent purges cause fatal dehydration, and remedies containing mercury, lead, or arsenic systematically poison those who consume them. Congratulations, you've survived a medieval medical consultation. Now you're weaker due to bloodletting, slightly poisoned by the metallic remedy, and considerably poorer, but at least you have that comforting feeling that something was done. Even if that something has significantly brought you closer to the grave. Spoiler, it doesn't end well. After surviving for now diseases, chronic hunger, and exhausting work, you might think that at least your social life offers some consolation. What lovely optimism! Allow me to introduce you to the medieval social structure, a system as flexible as granite and as welcoming as a bloodletting session. Medieval society operates under the elegant tripartite model. Oratores, those who pray, clergy; bellatores, those who fight, nobility; and laboratores, those who work, you, and all the other unfortunates. This structure isn't just an organizational convenience. It's literally ordained by God, as the clergy will gently remind you at every opportunity. Questioning your position in the social pyramid is questioning the very divine order of the universe. Spoiler, it's not healthy to question the divine order of the universe. You were born a peasant, will live as a peasant, and will die as a peasant. Your children will be peasants. Their children will be peasants. Detect a pattern. Vertical social mobility is so rare that when it happens, it's often considered suspicious, possibly involving demonic pacts or sexual favors to the local nobility. The occasional exceptions, like an exceptionally brilliant peasant child accepted for monastic education, only confirm the rigidity of the rule. Your social status is immediately identifiable to any observer. Your clothes, made of coarse fabrics in undyed colors or cheap earthy tones, announce your position. Your posture, marked by years of physical labor. Your local dialect, your simple haircut, even your smell. Everything proclaims peasant as clearly as if you carried a sign. You don't just accept this hierarchy, you completely internalize it. When the local lord passes by on horseback, you automatically bow and avert your gaze. In his presence, you address him with elaborate honorific titles. This isn't staged behavior, it's a conditioned visceral response, like a dog that has learned where not to urinate in the house. If the social structure weren't restrictive enough, there's also the dense mesh of superstitions that regulates every aspect of your daily behavior. Your life is a minefield of taboos, omens, and protective rituals. Don't cut your nails on Fridays, it brings bad luck. Don't compliment a child without immediately spitting or making the sign of the cross. It attracts envy and the evil eye. Don't walk under a ladder, it creates a triangle with the devil. Don't let a black cat cross your path, it's a witch's familiar. Don't plant during the waning moon. The harvest will be stunted. These aren't casual beliefs that you secretly disregard. They're absolute certainties that govern your decisions. When your neighbor transgresses one of these unwritten rules and subsequently loses a cow to disease, everyone knows exactly why. It's not a coincidence, it's a direct consequence of violating the shared superstitious code. Social control is suffocatingly effective. The church monitors your moral conformity through mandatory confessions and threatening sermons. The feudal lord oversees your economic productivity through vigilant overseers. And, perhaps most effectively, your own neighbors maintain constant supervision of any deviation from established norms. Privacy is a non-existent concept in a community where houses have thin walls, when they have walls at all, where everyone works side by side in the same fields, and where survival depends on group conformity. Every aspect of your life is open to public scrutiny. Sex, family arguments, child discipline, hygiene practices or lack thereof, everything happens with close witnesses. However, not everything in medieval social life is oppression and surveillance. There are moments of genuine joy, rare, precious, and therefore intensely valued. Seasonal festivities punctuate the calendar like oases of pleasure in a desert of work and deprivation. These aren't simple recreational breaks. They're essential release valves for accumulated social tensions, moments of controlled inversion, of rigid hierarchies. Harvest festivals, solstices, patron saints' days. Each celebration has its specific rituals, many with pagan roots so ancient that not even the church managed to eradicate them completely. So wisely, it decided to incorporate them. During these festivities, habitually prohibited behavior receives temporary tolerance. You can drink excessively, dance until dawn, openly court the opposite sex, and even satirize your social superiors through burlesque representations. The Day of Fools and similar festivals of inversion allow servants to act as lords, young people to mock elders, and the profane to temporarily invade the sacred. This programmed social catharsis serves as a safety valve for the system, a small period of controlled chaos that, ironically, strengthens the established order by relieving pressures that could lead to genuine revolt. Weddings are crucial social events, much less related to romantic love, and much more to strategic economic alliances. The concept of marriage for love is considered frivolous and irresponsible. You don't risk family survival based on something as volatile as feelings, any more than you would choose a plough ox for its charming personality. Matrimonial arrangements begin early. Girls may be promised before even reaching puberty, typically marrying between 14 and 16 years of age. Young men typically wait until establishing some economic viability, marrying between 18 and 24 years of age. Parents negotiate dowries and verbal contracts considering practical factors, combined lands, complementary skills, apparent health, presumed reproductive capacity. The ceremony itself is surprisingly informal by later standards. Medieval marriage often happens literally at the church door, not inside it. A brief priestly blessing followed by a community feast that serves as public testimony of the union. Consummation is a semi-public event for noble couples, with witnesses checking the stained sheets as proof. And for peasants, simply another activity conducted in the single room shared with the rest of the family. When not working or participating in religious festivals, you occasionally enjoy games and pastimes that perfectly reflect the brutality of everyday life. Children's games teach practical skills. Stone throwing develops precision for future hunting. Tug of war establishes strength hierarchies. Hide and seek trains stealth. Toys are improvised. Cloth dolls, small. Bows and arrows, animals carved from wood. Adult male games are remarkably violent. Wrestling competitions where gouged eyes and broken bones are considered acceptable accidents. Primitive ball games between neighboring villages often degenerate into genuine pitched battles, with the playing field extending several kilometers between communities. These games, without clear rules, regularly result in serious injuries and occasionally deaths, which are briefly mourned before the next festival. Brings a new edition of the bloody entertainment. Gambling flourishes despite frequent ecclesiastical condemnations. Dice made from bones, rudimentary card games, bets on animal fights. Any opportunity to potentially improve your miserable luck is eagerly adopted, even if statistically it only worsens your situation. Taverns and community spaces vibrate with the enthusiasm of men betting their last pennies in hope of a miraculous reversal of fortune. Competitions between villages are particularly intense. What begins as a friendly archery dispute or a competition for who produces the best local beer often carries centuries of territorial rivalries, ancestral insults, and poorly resolved border disputes. When two communities face each other in any competitive context, it's not just a game, it's the continuation of historical conflicts by other means, often returning to the original means, direct violence, before the end of the day. At night, gathered around the fire, you participate in the oral tradition that simultaneously serves as entertainment and education. Local storytellers, often the community elders, recite tales that have been memorized and transmitted for generations. These aren't just entertainment, they're repositories of collective wisdom, moral warnings, cosmological explanations, and survival manuals disguised as narratives. When a troubadour or itinerant minstrel visits, a rare and celebrated event, you're briefly transported beyond the confines of your immediate world. These figures bring news from distant lands, court songs, stories of battles and romance, windows to a wider universe that you'll never personally experience. For a few hours, grouped around this exotic visitor, your entire village collectively transcends the limited horizon of everyday existence. Religiosity permeates every aspect of medieval social life. The local church isn't just a place of worship, it's the community center, courthouse, emergency shelter, and meeting point for all kinds of activities. The religious calendar determines when you work, when you celebrate, when you fast, and when you feast. The annual liturgical cycle provides the structure within which all social life exists. Religious processions are elaborate social events where community hierarchy is visually represented. The most important walk closest to sacred objects. The least significant follow behind. Participating in these public demonstrations of piety isn't optional. Your absence would be noticed and interpreted as dangerously deviant. Religious conformity is simultaneously social control and survival mechanism. One of the most popular entertainments, though nobody would openly admit it, are public executions and punishments. Hangings, beheadings, and even occasional burnings at the stake attract enormous crowds, often with a festive atmosphere. Peddlers seize the opportunity, selling food, drinks, and even macabre souvenirs. Children are lifted onto shoulders for better viewing. Families bring meals for picnics, couples caught on the crowd's periphery. This spectacle of human suffering serves multiple purposes: graphic demonstration of the consequences of transgression, affirmation of authority's power, and, not least, a rare form of free entertainment. Brutality is presented as justice, and the crowd actively participates through shouts, insults, and occasionally throwing objects at the condemned. You're not prepared for this, but you would be there watching, just like all your neighbors. The culture of drunkenness deserves special mention. Alcohol consumption in the Middle Ages isn't just recreational, it's nutritional, medicinal, and deeply social. Beer and wine aren't drinks for special occasions, they're basic daily hydration, consumed by all ages. Typical medieval beer has lower alcohol content than modern versions, but is consumed in impressive volumes, several litres daily per adult. Taverns are central institutions for male community life, informal parliaments where business is conducted, disputes resolved, news shared, and alliances formed. Drunkenness is accepted as a natural state after work, and only the most extreme excesses attract disapproval. Religion tolerates this alcoholic culture. Monasteries are often the largest producers of beer and wine, and even children receive beer soup for breakfast. A final fascinating aspect of your medieval social experience is linguistic diversity. The idea of standardized national language is centuries away. You speak a local dialect that might be incomprehensible to someone living just 50 kilometers away. Your vocabulary, pronunciation, and expressions are distinct from those of the next village, creating an exclusive community linguistic identity. This dialectal fragmentation means travelers from distant regions appear foreign even while technically speaking the same language. Communication between communities often depends on individuals who serve as linguistic intermediaries, merchants, clerics, or soldiers who have developed exposure to multiple dialects. In border regions, hybrid forms of communication naturally develop that are neither one language nor another, but functional enough for basic trade and important warnings. Beware wolves. Congratulations, you've survived your medieval social interaction. Your place in the hierarchy is firmly established at the bottom, your superstitions intact, your conformity impeccable, and you've found fleeting moments of genuine joy amid festivals, stories around the fire, and the occasional alcoholic stupor. Your social life is as limited as your diet, but at least you have the comfort of knowing exactly where you belong. Right at the bottom, exactly where you were born, and where you'll remain until death, probably premature, finally liberates you from this suffocating social structure. Good luck with that. The worst is yet to come. The sun finally begins its descent on the horizon, signaling the end of another brutally exhausting workday. You might think now comes the good part: relaxation, rest, perhaps even a bit of comfort. What lovely modern naivety! The medieval night isn't a period of comforting tranquility. It's a dark and dangerous threat against which your ancestors fight with inadequate tools and constant terror. Sunset in the Middle Ages isn't simply an astronomical event or an opportunity for aesthetic Instagram photos, which, by this way, doesn't exist, just like indoor bathrooms or anesthesia. It's a definitive frontier between relative safety and absolute danger. When the sun sets, you're essentially under curfew, imposed not by human authorities, but by the very hostile nature of the medieval night world. As the last golden rays disappear, you find yourself enveloped in darkness that your modern brain simply cannot comprehend. There's no light pollution on the horizon, no public lighting posts, no comforting glow from electronic devices. Medieval darkness is an absolute abyss, a complete absence of light that swallows everything, transforming the familiar into alien and the common into threatening. Your lighting options are primitive and dangerous. Candles, when available to common peasants, which isn't frequent, are made of tallow, melted animal fat molded around a rushwick. These smoking marvels emit a repugnant smell of rancid fat burning, generate black smoke that deposits on walls and ceilings, and provide approximately the same illumination as a modern lighter. Their flickering light creates dancing shadows that seem to have lives of their own, feeding already well-established superstitious fears. Oil lamp, a rare luxury. Oil is too expensive to waste on lighting when it could be consumed as precious calories. Most peasant homes primarily depend on the light from the central fire, the same hearth that provides heat and where meals are prepared. This fire is carefully maintained throughout the night, as reigniting it in the morning would be a time-consuming and frustrating process involving flints, tinder, and much patience that you don't have after waking up in the cold. Before night deepens completely, you need to perform a series of safety rituals that are simultaneously practical and superstitious. The cabin door is locked, not with sophisticated locks, but with a simple wooden bar, or in more primitive cabins, perhaps just tied shut. Windows, when they exist, are covered and sealed. Any opening is potentially dangerous, not just for human, or animal intruders, but for the nocturnal miasmas that everyone knows cause diseases, and for supernatural creatures always lurking. The domestic animals sharing your living space are strategically confined. Chickens on small elevated roosts, perhaps a pig in a designated corner, possibly a particularly valuable goat or sheep during winter. Their sounds, smells, and body heat become part of the domestic nighttime atmosphere. The concentrated aroma of humans and animals in a small, poorly ventilated space would create instant nausea in a modern person. But for you, it's just the comforting smell of home. Food is stored with meticulous care, protected against rodents and insects using techniques developed over generations. Baskets are hung from the ceiling, pots are sealed with wax or fat, bread is placed in elevated chests. Nothing is wasted, nothing is left exposed. Chronic hunger makes food security and its understandable obsession. With these preparations completed, your family gathers around the central source of heat and light, the fire. This configuration isn't just practical for conserving scarce resources, it's a social and psychological necessity. In the circle of weak light, you sit close to each other, sharing body heat that supplements the fire's warmth. The compulsory physical proximity of medieval life creates a sense of family intimacy that modern isolation has rendered almost unknown. Hands never remain idle, even at night. In the flickering light, work requiring less visual precision continues. Spinning wool, mending clothes, repairing tools, braiding ropes. Women frequently spin, an endless process, as each piece of fabric begins with countless hours of manually produced thread. Men carve wood for utensils or repair agricultural equipment. Children assist in these tasks as their age allows. Free time is actually just different work, performed in even worse, lighting conditions. It's at this moment that oral tradition comes alive. While hands work automatically at repetitive tasks, the tongue is free to tell stories. These aren't just entertainment, they're the medieval Wikipedia, Google Maps, and survival manual of your community, all wrapped in memorable narratives. The stories shared at night have specific functions. Tales of ancestors preserve crucial genealogical knowledge in societies without written records. Local legends serve as verbal maps. Never go to the north side of the swamp where the young shepherd disappeared is a geographical warning disguised as a horror story. Narratives about saints and miracles reinforce expected moral behavior. Tales of historical events, often distorted, always moralizing, establish community identity. But as night deepens, the character of the stories changes, voices lower to whispers, and the content becomes progressively darker. Because now is the time to talk about what lurks in the darkness, the supernatural bestiary that inhabits the shadows outside the fire's circle of light. The werewolf isn't a cinematic fantasy for you, it's a real and terrible threat. Your neighbor, who recently disappeared? Well, he was always a bit strange during full moons, wasn't he? Belief in lycanthropy is so deeply rooted that established legal procedures exist for dealing with suspected cases. Documented historical executions for lycanthropy show this wasn't just folkloric superstition, but a juridically recognized conviction. Medieval fairies aren't the adorable little creatures with magic wands from modern children's stories. They're dangerous beings capable of stealing children and replacing them with changelings, of disorienting travelers to death, of luring young people to dance until collapse. At the village edges, especially near unusual rock formations or mushroom circles, the territory belongs to these beings and you take elaborate precautions not to accidentally offend them. The dead don't remain passively buried in the medieval imagination. Revenants, corpses that return to torment the living, are a constant fear especially for those who died violently or prematurely. That's why suicides are buried at crossroads with stakes through their hearts, and certain funeral precautions are meticulously followed. Stories about the baker, who died suddenly and was seen wandering the cemetery the following night, aren't considered fanciful. They're practical. Warnings. Demons and malignant spirits complete the nocturnal pantheon of terror. Medieval demonology taxonomy is surprisingly detailed, with different types of entities associated with specific sins, hours of the night, and personal vulnerabilities. Against each supernatural threat, there's an equivalent protection. Specific herbs hung over doors, strategically positioned Christian symbols, prayers recited at critical moments. Hearing these stories around the week fire, you don't consider them fictional entertainment. They're realities of the darkness beyond your walls. The thin fabric separating the natural world from the supernatural becomes particularly porous at night, and you take every precaution to protect yourself. When finally the time comes to sleep, you face a new series of challenges. Your mattress and that same parasite-infested straw sack we mentioned at the beginning hasn't become more comfortable since morning. Medieval sleep is radically different from what you know in the modern world. Forget 8 uninterrupted hours of rest in a quiet, private room. Medieval sleep is often biphasic, a first period soon after nightfall, followed by an hour or two of wakefulness in the middle of the night, called first and second sleep, concluding with another rest period until dawn. During the interval of night wakefulness, contemplative activities, prayers, or even visits to neighbors occurred, a practice that would be considered bizarre by modern clock-timed society. Your sleeping position would be strange by contemporary standards. Lying completely horizontal was considered dangerous. Too similar to a corpse's position, you might attract death or allow demons to enter through the open mouth. Most medieval people slept semi-reclined, with the upper body elevated on improvised pillows or leaning against the wall. Medieval engravings rarely show people completely lying down to sleep. Nocturnal noises feed your insomnia. The straw mattress emits creaks with every movement. Animals inside the cabin produce their own disturbing sounds. From outside come the calls of owls, often interpreted as omens, the howling of wolves, possibly werewolves, and occasionally distant human screams. Better not investigate. Your brain, conditioned by a lifetime of real threats, keeps part of consciousness alert even during sleep. Cold is particularly relentless at night. The fire gradually diminishes and temperature drops quickly in poorly insulated cabins. In winter, waking up with frost inside the house is a common experience. Strategies to combat nocturnal cold are primitive but effective. Body heat sharing, everyone sleeps together, often with small animals. Heavy blankets of rough wool, stones heated by the fire and wrapped in cloths to serve as improvised hot water bottles. To maintain some heat during the night, the house is practically sealed, which means the air becomes progressively more laden and less oxygenated. The indoor environment is a suffocating mixture of residual smoke, exhalations from multiple bodies, intestinal gases from humans and animals, and the persistent aromas of the evening meal. This air quality contributes to the endemic respiratory diseases of the medieval population. As you try to sleep, your body protests in multiple ways. Parasites become particularly active at night when the host is relatively immobile. Fleas and lice feast on your skin, causing constant itching that interrupts any possibility of deep sleep. Your stomach growls with hunger, not completely satiated. Muscle and joint pains from daily work make any position uncomfortable after a few minutes. Even during this inadequate rest, community security continues functioning. In larger villages, a system of night watchmen patrols the dark streets. In smaller communities, residents often take turns with this responsibility. Equipped with simple lanterns and improvised weapons, these nocturnal guardians check locked doors, look for signs of fire, the most feared nocturnal threat, and occasionally shout the hours for temporal orientation. If danger is detected, be it fire, invaders, or any significant threat, an alarm system is activated. This might be a church bell rung in a specific pattern, a horn with a particular sound code, or simply coordinated shouts passed from house to house. The community response to these alerts is surprisingly quick and organized. When survival depends on immediate, collective action, social reflexes are sharpened by necessity. In the few hours before dawn, when sleep finally overcomes discomfort and fears, you reach a brief period of deeper rest. It's at this time that unconscious preparations for the next day occur, your brain processing the previous day's events and preparing for upcoming challenges. It's also when your teeth grind due to accumulated stress. Another wearing aspect of medieval life that contributes to the premature loss of teeth already compromised by deficient nutrition. Before falling completely asleep, your last conscious activity is typically a prayer, not just for religious devotion, but as a final psychological and spiritual protection against the terrors of the night. A medieval version of "If I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take" isn't a cute children's rhyme. It's a statistically significant possibility that you face every night. Medieval dreams are intensely vivid, often interpreted as real visits. From saints, demons, or souls of the dead, tomorrow your nightmare about a man in black will be seriously analyzed as a possible omen, not dismissed as mere difficult digestion. Dreams are messages to be decoded, not neurological byproducts of daytime processing. And so, in inadequate, parasite-infested, and interrupted sleep, you pass your nocturnal hours, a state that could hardly be called rest by modern standards. When the first roosters begin to crow, announcing the still distant dawn, you'll already be semi-awake, mentally preparing for another day of exhausting work. Congratulations, you've survived the medieval night. Your nocturnal prayers were answered this time, and you didn't succumb to a night attack, catastrophic fire, smoke suffocation, or visit from a vengeful revenant. Tomorrow the routine begins again, identical in almost all aspects. Spoiler, it doesn't get easier. The cycle continues day after day, season after season, in an endless repetition that will only end with your probably premature death, if lucky, in your own straw bed, surrounded by family. If not, well, there are countless other less pleasant possibilities waiting at every corner of your medieval existence. Well, here we are. You've experienced a complete day in the Middle Ages, from the torturous awakening in your nest of parasites to the night filled with supernatural and natural terrors. Somehow, against all statistical probabilities, you've survived these hypothetical 24 hours. Congratulations. Now imagine repeating this approximately 12,775 times, assuming you're one of the lucky ones who reach 35 years. Exciting, isn't it? Let's be realistic about your chances. The average life expectancy at birth in medieval Europe was approximately 30 years. But this number is deceptively low due to extraordinary infant mortality. About 30% of children died before completing 1 year, and almost half didn't. Reach 5 years of age. If you've already surpassed that initial barrier, which you clearly have since you're reading this, your chances improve considerably. Surviving childhood, you could expect to live until 40 to 50 years. Assuming you avoided wars, famine, plagues, and the thousands of creative accidents that the Middle Ages generously offered. Medieval demography is a science of losses and replacements. A typical woman became pregnant between 8 and 10 times during her reproductive life, giving birth to perhaps 6 or 7 live children. The others were miscarriages or stillbirths. Of these, statistically, only 2 or 3 would survive to adulthood, just enough to maintain a stable population. Population growth was slow not because of birth control, but through the relentless efficiency of medieval natural selection. Your chance of dying was dramatically determined by your social class. A nobleman had approximately double the chance of reaching old age compared to a peasant. This wasn't just the result of better nutrition and less debilitating physical work, but also the ability to literally flee epidemics, taking refuge in isolated rural properties when diseases swept through densely populated cities. Gender also significantly determined your longevity. Men died more frequently from violence and occupational accidents, while women faced the repeated dangers of childbirth. A medieval woman had approximately 1% to 5% chance of dying in each childbirth, numbers that seem small until you multiply them by 8 to 10 gestations throughout life. Do the math. A typical medieval woman faced a 10 to 40% chance of eventually dying while giving birth. Comparing medieval challenges with modern ones, the disparity is almost comical. You stress about work deadlines. Your medieval ancestor worried if they would have enough food to avoid starvation before the next harvest. You get irritated when Wi-Fi slows down. Your medieval equivalent celebrated when they managed to light a fire without spending their last flint. You worry about your annual performance evaluation. Your medieval doppelganger anxiously waited to see if they would be arbitrarily whipped by the overseer for not appearing enthusiastic enough while harvesting wheat. There are some surprising advantages to medieval life, of course, few but significant. The absence of social networks meant never experiencing FOMO, fear of missing out, while seeing fabricated influencer vacations on paradisiacal beaches. The lack of precise clocks eliminated constant productivity anxiety. Low life expectancy expectations removed the midlife existential crisis. Nobody in the medieval world ever bought a red convertible at 45 to compensate for their mortality. When you expect to die at any moment, each day is a victory, not a right. If we were building a morbid ranking of medieval causes of death, the podium would be occupied by formidable competitors. In first place, indisputably, would be infectious diseases, the lethal combination of inadequate sanitation, incorrect medical understanding, and constant proximity to animals and their pathogens. The plague, of course, deserves special mention for its efficiency in decimating entire populations, but common respiratory infections, gastrointestinal diseases, and infected wounds collectively killed many more people in medieval daily life. The silver medal would go to hunger and chronic malnutrition. Even not counting catastrophic famine periods, which occurred approximately 3 times per century, constant malnutrition weakened immune systems, delayed healing, and created a perpetually vulnerable population to any additional stress. Specific nutritional deficiencies, scurvy, pellagra, rickets, sometimes killed directly, but more often prepared the ground for other diseases to deliver the final blow. Bronze would belong to violence, not just organized wars, but the everyday brutality of a society where minor disputes frequently ended in bloodshed, where justice was applied through severe corporal punishments, and where bandits and plundering soldiers were normal occupational hazards of rural existence. We cannot ignore accidents as a serious competitor in this macabre competition. In a world without safety regulations, protective equipment, or basic understanding of physics, fatal accidents were extraordinarily common. Falls from heights, crushings by large animals, drownings, severe burns. Medieval life was an amusement park of accidental death waiting to happen. For women, childbirth and its complications would deserve their own category. A reproductive Russian roulette. that each woman played repeatedly throughout her fertile life. Postpartum infections, hemorrhages, eclampsia, and obstructed labor killed so reliably that many women made arrangements for their children and prepared themselves spiritually for death before each childbirth. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of medieval life for contemporary sensibilities is the complete normalization of suffering. Physical pain wasn't a medical emergency, it was simply the default state of existence. Teeth slowly rotting in the mouth, untreated hernias, deforming arthritis, intestinal parasites, all conditions that today would justify urgent medical consultations were simply accepted as that's life. This normalization had both practical and theological roots. Practically, there were no viable alternatives. Effective treatments simply didn't exist for most conditions. Theologically, suffering was interpreted as an integral part of the post-fall human condition, an opportunity for atonement, an echo of Christ's sufferings. The person who didn't suffer was suspect. Clearly something was wrong with someone who escaped the universal burden of human suffering. Medieval life existed in cycles, not in linear progression, as we tend to conceptualize today. The next day would be almost identical to the previous one. The next year would follow the same seasonal pattern as the previous one. The next generation would face the same challenges, use the same tools, eat the same foods, and die from the same causes as the previous one. The idea of constant progress, technological, social, economic, would be as foreign as microprocessors. This cyclicality profoundly affected medieval psychology. The modern concept of improving one's life through personal effort was almost non-existent. Your perspective was to maintain what you had, not gain what you didn't have. The goal wasn't to ascend socially, but simply to avoid descending, a defensive posture, not an aspirational one. Social immobility wasn't just an economic reality, but a fundamental philosophical and theological premise. The social hierarchy was literally ordered by God, each person born in their designated place in the great divine plan. Questioning your position wasn't just impractical, but heretical. The dominant narrative wasn't you can be whatever you want, but you must be what you were born to be. Exceptions to this rule were so rare they often became legendary, and almost always involved the church as the only vehicle for ascension. A brilliant peasant could, with extraordinary luck and patronage, enter the clergy and theoretically reach even cardinal status. In practice, the highest ecclesiastical positions were as dominated by nobility as secular titles, but at least the theoretical possibility existed, serving as an escape valve for the system. It's tempting to think that at least nobility enjoyed a comfortable and pleasurable existence amid all this misery. And in many material aspects they certainly lived better. They ate more and better, had larger and warmer houses, and possessed more resources to escape diseases and dangers. But don't be deceived by retrospective glamour. A medieval nobleman still faced deadly dangers constantly. Frequent wars where his participation was mandatory, lethal political intrigues, forced marriages for strategic alliances, and medicine that, although more expensive, was equally ineffective. Nobility's hygiene was only marginally better than peasants. Complete baths were more frequent, perhaps monthly instead of seasonal, but basic concepts of asepsis remained equally absent. A nobleman could die from an infection resulting from a small cut as easily as a peasant. The only difference was that he did it in slightly cleaner sheets. The romanticization of the Middle Ages, the good old days of noble knights, virtuous maidens and happy peasants dancing around the maypole, is a retrospective fabrication that would have caused hysterical laughter or absolute confusion among actual medieval inhabitants. This idealized vision was constructed primarily during the 19th century Romantic period, when urban intellectuals, alienated by industrialization, projected pastoral fantasies onto a past that never existed. Archaeological evidence tells a very different story. Medieval skeletons reveal lives of brutal labor beginning in childhood, specific bone deformities caused by carrying heavy loads from the age of 6 or 7. They show patterns of severe dental wear, multiple poorly healed fractures, and clear signs of chronic malnutrition. Cemeteries are disproportionately filled with small children and women of reproductive age. This is not evidence of an idyllic society, but of a constant struggle against the brutal limitations of primitive technology, medicine, and social organization. Curiously, many medieval problems find unexpected parallels in contemporary society. Socioeconomic inequality, though less extreme than feudalism, continues to significantly determine access to resources, life expectancy, and opportunities. Epidemics still test our medical and social infrastructure, as we have recently seen. Misinformation, previously spread by rumors in the marketplace, now travels at the speed of light through social networks. Perhaps most surprising is that the psychological distance between us and our medieval ancestors is smaller than we would like to admit. The main lesson we can extract from this dive into medieval life is not self-pity for our modern difficulties, nor simplistic gratitude for technological advances. It is the realization of the extraordinary arbitrariness of human birth, the cosmic lottery that determines in which century, geographical, location, and social circumstance we are born. Nothing you did deserved your birth with anesthesia, antibiotics, and clean drinking water, just as nothing your medieval ancestor did deserved being born into a world without these luxuries. Our existence is shaped by forces far beyond our individual control, a fact as true today as it was in the Middle Ages, although our illusions of control have become more sophisticated. The difference is that now we collectively have more tools to modify these forces, more knowledge to understand them, and more capacity to mitigate their most brutal aspects. You survived this hypothetical medieval day. Your actual ancestors survived enough days to eventually produce you. Among them were people who experienced exactly the conditions described here, who felt each pain, feared each threat, and somehow persevered. Your existence is the final product of an unbroken chain of survivors extending backward through the centuries. People whose names you probably don't know, but whose genes you carry. The next time you complain about your modern memory foam mattress, remember that flea-infested straw sack. When you're impatient waiting for a high-definition video to load, think about the long medieval nights with only oral stories as entertainment. And when work seems oppressive, consider that your medieval ancestor worked literally from sunrise to sunset without sunscreen, scheduled breaks, or any possibility of retirement. History is not just a parade of facts and dates. It is a mirror that reflects our own human condition in different settings. Looking at the past should not only serve to feed superficial gratitude for the present, but to understand more deeply the constants of human experience that transcend time and technology, our fundamental needs, our primal fears, our capacity for adaptation, and our search for meaning, even in the most adverse circumstances. You were lucky. That's the inescapable conclusion. Not because of your choices, merit, or effort, but because of the cosmic accident of having been born now and not then. Remember that when the washing machine breaks or the Wi-Fi fails, some ancestor of yours is watching from beyond, rolling their eyes at your modern tragedy, while unconsciously scratching the fleas that accompanied them throughout their brief and brutal medieval existence.